I'm waiting for Tim to arrive. He's flown all the way across the world from Australia to England.
Hey, mate, I'm good.
How was the flight?
When I come out at Heathrow, I imagine the final scene in Love Actually, you know? Love is...
Yeah, except instead of Hugh Grant and stuff, you get me. Welcome to my house in England. We're recording in person. This is exciting.
It is.
You sound excited.
I'm sorry. I'm a little bit jet lagged, but I'm good.
And on the flight over, as promised, you've come up with a huge big list of ideas. I can't wait to hear that. Do I even need to give ideas? You must have so many that I can just put my feet up, surely.
Well, having carried you this far, I feel like I need to keep you involved to some degree. But I do have a long list in front of me.
You were standing in the corner a minute ago going, oh, these are all rubbish. Can you go first, please? So I will go first. Are you ready for my first idea?
I am. Yeah, you shoot ahead. Get us going.
So the idea for this podcast is called Nicknames. And it's a podcast all about, funnily enough, nicknames.
Oh, that's great.
Because there's so much stuff with nicknames. There are people with nicknames. There are places with nicknames, sports teams. And I think you could go in all sorts of different directions. Like there are so many directions you could go in here. I haven't even really completely focused it in my head, but I do think it would be really good fun. Like today we're going to talk about interesting inanimate objects with nicknames, like Big Ben, the bell, you know, in the clock in London and things like that. This week we're going to talk about famous people from history who had interesting nicknames. One of my favourites is Lyndon Johnson, the US president's wife, was Lady Bird Johnson. She was called Lady Bird since she was a kid. Or Buzz Aldrin. Oh, of course I would do the Moonwalker, things like that. How do they get their nicknames? What do we think of them? The show could also come up with nicknames for things, critique them, ones we like, ones we don't like. I just think this is a very fertile ground.
I think this is brilliant. I think this is actually probably one of the best ideas you've had.
It wouldn't make your top 10.
No, this is really... In fact, I think there's a whole... When you just said it, I thought, oh, that's great. There's a whole podcast just in people and their nickname and how they got it and why. I didn't even think about things like Big Ben and inanimate objects.
Yeah.
That's right. That's so funny how we personalise objects like that with nicknames.
Have you had nicknames over the years? I've never really had a nickname for you. I've just always called you Tim.
Yeah.
Have you got, like, you know, what have you been called over the years?
When I was a kid, I was amused, but I kind of had three names, like Tim, Timmy and Timothy. And different people would call me different ones. And cousins affectionately called me Timmy, or when I was little, it was like Little Timmy. And so they still call me that sometimes. But obviously it's Tim most of the time and Timothy very, very rarely. Yeah. Although I've grown into liking Timothy more as I get older. But as a kid, it sounded, you know, dorky and too formal and stuff. There was a time when I was doing youth work stuff at one stage, and a particular group of people started calling me Hind Dog.
Hind Dog?
Hind Dog, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Tim's surname is Hind for those who've never delved into the show notes or our website. So Hind Dog is your surname with dog on the end.
I mean,
I like her.
It's sort of funny because I'm so not a hind dog kind of cat. Like that's like a big football player kind of name, or you know what I mean, like a more of a surfer name, but I'm just not that person. Hind Dog. So it's kind of a little bit ironic.
Was it Hind Dog or the Hind Dog?
No, it was Hind Dog. But that was a few people for a little while, and thankfully that never caught on beyond that.
Well, lucky you just said it on a podcast.
Timbo, I get a little bit. In fact, I call myself Timbo sometimes.
You call yourself Timbo?
Well, as you know, if
everyone, it's Timbo here. That's your radio name.
Again, ironically, like Timbo's come up with a good idea again. Hey, you know, that sort of thing. Because again, I'm just not a Timbo kind of guy.
No.
So
you're not a Timbo. I'm going to try. I'm going to take that for a test drive today when we go out for lunch later.
What about you, man? Well, man.
Well, we call each other man, but that's just like, that's not really a nickname. That's just, I don't know what you'd call that. That's just like...
I don't know where it came from. I can't remember.
I don't know.
I think it came from somewhere, like a film or something, but I don't remember.
I don't know. It's
lost in the mist of time.
It's been around for years. But I have very few nicknames and have had very few over the years. There's a very small group of people who call me Braids. I've never had a good one as well. Like, obviously, adaptations of your name are obvious nicknames, and that happens a lot, whether it's your first name or your surname. My favourite nicknames, and I know very few people with this, but I have like a subgroup of friends who I'm just peripheral to, who all their nicknames have nothing to do with their real name. You would never know their name to hear their nickname.
Yeah, right.
Like it's Goose and the Field Marshal and Stormin and all these, like, they've all got all these weird nicknames and then real names are like, John and Fred and that, but they've got all these really elaborate nicknames. And like, how did it come up with that? And there's always this incredible long story behind it. So I'm jealous of people who like have nicknames that have nothing to do with their name. I think that's pretty awesome.
I mean, Australians are classic. I think they're unique. We say that we're unique in that we're forever shortening words down.
Diminutive, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So, and adding an O. So Steve or Stephen becomes Steve-O and Dave-O from David, and we forever doing that with even really, really, really short names.
Yeah.
You almost make them longer to add the O and to make them sound a little bit long. So Jim becomes Jimmy or Jimmo. Or, like it's an adaptation in that way, an adaptation. But I imagine that's not just an Australian thing, or it must be done in a different way in different cultures. Do you know?
I mean, obviously it happens elsewhere, but it is like a big part of Australian culture. And they'll even do it to things that you think are almost like inappropriate to do it to. Like a shotgun is a shotty.
Yeah,
Things
right.
Like that. Like, oh, you're giving nicknames to like firearms now? Like, why do we want to give things nicknames?
Maybe we feel we own them a little bit more. They become more personal.
Yeah, or is it almost like a badge of closeness? Like, yeah, okay, everyone at work calls you Tim, but I'm close enough to you to call you Hind Dog. Yeah.
But it's funny because there's nothing more personal than your actual name. So you're giving someone a new title to make it more personal when actually that has no basis or foundation. You're putting that, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing more personal than their real name, but you're wanting to give them something else to make it even more personal, which is ridiculous in a way.
I'll tell you a nickname that I find annoying, because another thing that people have nicknames for are where you're from. Australians, of course, are called Aussies because we put the diminutive on that, like we would. Like if you're from Ohio, you're called like Buckeye and things like that. But the place that I'm from and where you now live, if you're from South Australia, one of the nicknames for South Australians that's always annoyed me is crow eater.
Oh, yeah.
People from South Australia are called crow eaters. I mean, obviously they don't eat crows, the bird. Like the crow's not even the bird of South Australia. It's not like it's the state bird or anything. I don't know why the crow has become so associated with South Australia. One of the Australian rules football teams from South Australia has subsequently been called the Adelaide Crows, which kind of annoys me as well, because hang on, if we're people who eat crows...
Where does the crow eating come from? Do you know even? Adelaide
no, I don't. I mean, there is a saying to eat crow, isn't there? In fact, until now, I've never associated with the saying of eating crow. What does the saying eating crow... Eating crow is a colloquial idiom used in English-speaking countries that means humiliation by admitting having been proven wrong. So surely we're not called crow eaters because we're saying we're...
Well, it's obviously a pejorative term given by other states, probably Victorians, where I'm from.
Yeah. So South Australians have kind of adopted it a bit now, haven't they? Or would a South Australian call themselves a crow eater? Or is it just outsiders that call them crow eaters?
It could be a situation where it's where the name that you're given in a derogatory way you adopt, like the Whigs in history and that sort of thing, and you own it. And so that's why they're called the Crows. You're going to call us crow eaters, will be the Crows. They're you're blunting the attack by judoing it or whatever. I remember when I was a kid and we were moving to South Australia, people said, you're going to be a crow eater. And I sort of picked up that, that's what you call the Adelaide people. But I don't know why it is or where it comes from. It might be based in football, losing football matches or something way back.
South Australia is a slightly smaller state than those big states to the east. So I could see how you would give like a humbling name to the smaller state. And then that's just been lost in time, and then to a point where we would even call our football team Crows.
You know, it's funny because on the emblem for South Australia, isn't it a magpie?
It's actually a piping shrike, which looks like a magpie, but it's a different bird called a piping shrike.
Tell me about that. Like, why is that our...
Luckily, I have Wikipedia here. I did know that. See, you can tell I'm a real South Australian and you're an import because you don't know that.
No.
The piping shrike is the emblematic bird that appears on South Australia's flag. Hang on, is it a real bird?
Emblematic bird, like it's a made-up bird.
I never knew that. I never knew this. Because the name piping shrike is not used to identify any bird, there has been some confusion over what bird it represents. While some think it resembles the magpie lark, the original reports specify that it is based on the Australian magpie. And the government's... So you were probably more right than me.
So it's a magpie, but they've just given it a new name to put it on the flag because magpies were trademarked. Is that right?
I don't know. The piping shrike first appeared on the governor's ensign in 1903. That's the governor of South Australia. And was also on the state badge when it was proclaimed in 1904. So it sounds like it's like a made-up bird.
Wow. There you go.
The term piping shrike is commonly mistaken to refer to the magpie lark, which is incorrect.
It is. It's like they've got a magpie and then someone's coloured in the wings a little bit differently and made up a name for it, and that's our state bird.
So that's like a fictional bird on the South Australian flag? Welcome to England, by the way. You come all the way across the world to record with me in England, and all we're doing is talking about the South Australian state flag.
Piping shrike? Is that what it is?
Shrike. S-H-R-I-K-E.
Which is a nickname for a magpie in South Australia by the sounds of it.
It sounds like it. Anyway.
Sporting teams have heaps of nicknames,
Yes,
don't they?
yes.
I've watched a doco series, which I'll talk about a little bit later, actually, of a particular sport. I'll explain then. And it's like being part of the team means you get a name. It's part of an initiation. You've been welcomed because you've got a nickname. And that's pretty legendary, I imagine, in most team sports.
I'll tell you a sports person who had an interesting nickname, and that was the Australian cricketer Mark Waugh. Because Mark Waugh...
I've forgotten his nickname.
He joined the Australian cricket team. He has a brother, Steve Waugh, and his brother became successful before him and was an established Australian cricketer, and Mark Waugh was always trying to break into the team. The surname Waugh is spelled W-A-U-G-H. So it sounds like war, like World War II, but it's spelled differently. Mark Waugh finally kind of broke into the team and became a very successful player, obviously, in his own right. But his nickname for years and years was always Afghanistan, because famously the Afghanistan war at the time, this was years ago before Afghanistan had its new wars, had an old famous war, and it was always referred to as the Forgotten War. So because Mark Waugh was considered the Forgotten War because his brother Steve Waugh was more famous, his nickname in the team was Afghanistan, and that stuck for years and years. That was his nickname among the players. Hey, Afghanistan.
I've never heard that before. Your cricket knowledge is extremely far more expansive than mine. Far more expensive. But hang on a second. But actually, he's not the most forgotten war, is it? Don't they have a third brother?
Dean Waugh.
And he never played cricket?
Yeah. I don't think he played for Australia. So he's like gone. He's not even a forgotten war.
He's not even. It's like imagine having a brother who's really famous, who's called the Forgotten War because he's not as famous as the other brother. We're in a Baldwin turf here.
Yeah, I'm so unfamous. I'm not even as famous as my unfamous brother.
Whose nickname is based on the fact that he's not as well known as the other guy.
You are well down the pecking order, my friend.
Well down the pecking order.
Anyway. Nicknames, good podcast idea.
I don't feel like I just want to. I feel like there's so much more to this we could keep talking about. It's a really, really good idea.
There is. We'll come back to it another time, maybe. But in the meantime, I want to hear an idea from you. This episode of the podcast has been brought to you by Audible. We actually have a really cool book to recommend, but it ties in with an idea later in the show, so we're going to talk about Audible then.
I've given a little bit of a foretaste for it when I was talking about the documentary. My podcast idea is called Explain a Sport.
Oh, yeah.
The reason this has come about is because I've been aware forever, of course, of American football. Well, since I've been an adult, not really forever. As a kid, I didn't know much about it, NFL. And I've never known much about it. I know there's a Super Bowl. I know there's something else called the Rose Bowl. I know some of the teams like the Dallas Cowboys, but I didn't really know the details. And you watch it and it's never made an impression on me. It was almost like, why are they playing football with so much equipment on, helmets and so forth? But I got watching a doco series and I've learned a little bit more. I've got a really good mate who's just really loves it and has not tried to convert me, but has talked about it, and I've been vaguely interested in it. But I was watching this doco series.
The fact you use the word doco so casually instead of documentary shows your Australian nicknameness and diminutive.
Oh, yeah.
You always say doco, and I always think, oh man, that's as Australian as you sound when you refer to docos.
Of course, I don't even think about that. Yeah, I was watching a documentary series called All or Nothing, which is made by the NFL, and John Hamm from Mad Men is narrating it, and they follow through. In the first season, the Arizona Cardinals all the way through, and it's in depth, like week by week, and you really get to appreciate it. So my podcast, there's a sense at some stage early on I was really taken by it, but I needed to understand the sport. What does this mean? Because it's quite a complex game and a very unique game, really quite unlike. You sort of think it's supposed to be like rugby, but it's actually not at all. Even though there's an area that you're trying to get the ball to, it's so different. And I was like, I need someone to explain this to me. And so my friend has been explaining it to me through text messages and so forth. But I was thinking, explain a sport. There are sports you think everyone knows about, but you don't. And so a podcast that goes through and, well, let's explain this. What you're trying to do is to get from here to here. And you've got to do this. And that would be of interest. And then it could go off increasingly into more obscure sports and talk about why the sport is interesting or why forgotten sports, why they've been forgotten. Used to be huge. This game was huge in the 1800s, but it's not played anymore. And then there's new sports that come out. Like I think PE teachers or physical education teachers talk about let's make up a sport. It's like baseball, but it's rounders, but we're going to do this and this and this and adapts it. But sometimes they come up with whole new sports. You've got to get across the yard with the ball and touch this and go. So you can explain them.
Does the doco you've been watching explain football, American football, or is it made with that as assumed knowledge and you've just been enjoying it for the storytelling and learning about the sport is something you've kind of had to do on the side to assist your enjoyment of the documentary?
No, it assumes that you are American or you just have known this game your whole life. Yeah.
Your podcast idea, like, are you imagining it being explained by like an authority to someone who's not an authority, or is it just someone like talking from on high out to the audience? Or have you thought about how the format would work?
Well, I thought the explanation could be between two people. So someone like me and someone about it could be, and so I get to ask the questions that everyone's asking.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you want to learn about a new game or something, how do you play, I don't know, backgammon or particular card game, and you might watch it, you might read up about it, and that's can be really helpful. You can read the instructions, which is supposed to be helpful, or you can watch a YouTube clip. And sometimes I always find if I've watched a YouTube clip to understand something, I don't know, I feel like I want to ask questions. Hang on a second, before you move to there, what about this? If this happens at this stage. So the podcast kind of enables you to do that. It's a dummy's guide, but you get to ask questions about it. Why would you do that? Or why is that called that?
I'm going to make a controversial claim here.
Yeah.
I think that is not a good idea for a podcast.
Man.
Sorry.
Wow.
And the reason is I think that it is too big a handicap to try to do that without visuals.
Yeah.
Like you would have to be explaining so many things in such detail that could be so easily glossed over with just like a single image. Yeah, a whiteboard or a single image or a bit of video. And also, if you explained the sport for 100 hours and people formed a picture in their head of what the playing of that sport looked like, the moment they watched 30 seconds of the sport, they'd be like, I didn't even imagine it looking like that after your explanation.
No, it's not like they've come out of a cave.
Right.
And they've got no idea, okay, explain the concept of sport to me. And
right.
Like you could sit, let me put it the other way. You could watch NFL for 100 hours and you may not pick up exactly, I mean, you get the premise of what's going on, but there's so many things it's almost like you've watched a game or you've watched it a little bit and now you listen to the explanation. It's like, okay, that's why they're doing that.
Fair enough, but I still stand by my original call that I think this would be too difficult, too much of a cognitive load. Even if you've seen the sport before, which you're right, most people would have, it would be too much to be visualizing all the things. It would be so... Now imagine you're in front of the line and you're throwing it forward, but you could step back and there would be so much minutia you'd be describing that needs visuals. I like the idea, and I like, I love sport, but I think there is a sport podcast inside your idea fighting to get out. But I think it has to be something different to just like explaining the sport to someone who doesn't understand the sport. I think that's like a valuable service and like there's something to be said like and there's an idea there, there's a demand for it. And I think there's also it could be done in lots of entertaining ways. I think an audio only format is not the natural home for it.
This is a way it could be saved and that is by the same people and two characters, one person who knows lots about the sport and another one who just has no idea. And there's a rapport about, let me explain this and why is this of interest and why do people and what's the history behind this? I think there's something there about explaining a sport. And you're basically trying to convince the person to become... to admit, this is, you know what I mean? To become informed and excited about the sport.
Why I love a sport would be a good podcast. Like if I said to you, Tim, I love NFL, I love American football, and you're like, that's never really done it for me. And you did a podcast where the other person evangelizes for their sport. I think you would drop in a little bit of, this is why I like it, this is how it works, but it would be less explainy.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's like a better way into talking to people about sports they don't know rather than like explaining it and how it works. I think that's too like rules based and too A bit too dry.
What I hear you saying is that it could be based around anecdotes. Like the reason this is what happened, the reason this is exciting is because actually once upon a time in 1985, this player did this and I was watching and you know what I mean? It's just the reason that's amazing is that never happens. Like I can't believe that happened. And you know, so there's a bit of context behind the things you're explaining about. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
A really good example of that is Test cricket, which is this sport that lasts for 5 days, and everyone knows this game goes for 5 days and can end in like a no result, a draw. A draw is not a tie when the scores are equal. A draw is we ran out of time and there was no conclusion to the game, so no one wins. And everyone thinks that's ridiculous. What a boring sport that you can play for 5 days and you don't even get a result because you ran out of time. And yet draws can be a fascinating part of the game. Some of the most exciting matches in history have ended in draws. It's a big part of like the strategy of the game, playing for the draw, playing for the win, trying to get a draw when you're going to lose. Like, so having someone who loves cricket explain to someone why draws are actually a feature rather than a negative part of the sport would be quite interesting.
Cool. I'm trying to work out in the midst of my idea, because I've become quite interested in NFL watching this documentary series. It's kind of clicked as to why it's tense and exciting as I've journeyed with these teams, a different team each season. And I realised how much comes down to a few seconds and one move and one catch. And, you know, there's only 16 games in the regular season. And so that's all given a context to it. And I get it. I kind of get it now, even though there's lots I still don't know about the game. And I haven't actually watched a full game yet because it's not the NFL season or anything.
NFL would be a really tough game for it too, because I only really watch the Super Bowl and occasionally I watch a college game or sometimes I'll watch an NFL game. And every game I watch, I learn like a new, really complicated rule. There's lots of rules in American football and exceptions, and like really, like it's got very specific rules. But it is a complicated game. I do enjoy it very much, though. It is a game I enjoy. I'll tell you what, I pride myself on knowing a lot about sport and watching lots of sports, and I also think I'm pretty good at watching a new sport and picking it up pretty quickly and learning about it. There's one sport that I've watched a few times on TV that completely baffles me. And it's like it's come from another planet, and I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how you win. It's like it's made up. It's like a joke on me. And I had to look up its name because I can never remember its name properly either. It's called Kabaddi. Kabaddi.
Let me try and guess what Kabaddi is.
Okay.
Is Kabaddi that... Oh, no, because the premise of this works. There is that winter sport where they push that little shuttle thing and it slides along the ice and they've got with broomsticks.
Oh, curling.
Curling, okay. Yeah. I've just offended all our many Canadian listeners now. That's curling, that's right. Yeah. I thought I knew the name of that, but Kabaddi sounds a bit the same. Is it that sport, but it's done on grass? No.
That would be lawn bowls.
Oh, yeah.
So, no, Kabaddi looks to me like a sport that a PE teacher made up and got the kids to play it.
Is it a big game then? Is it?
It's big in India.
Wow.
And there's like a league and everything, which you won't believe when you see it. I'm going to show Tim a YouTube video of people playing Kabaddi. And they're on like this indoor court with like painted lines, and there's two groups of, it's men in this case, and some of them are holding hands in one rectangle, and there's one guy who's like trying to run into other rectangles. And it's kind of like a game of chasey, like tag.
What are they doing? So there's no ball.
No, it's like it's like chasey meets All Over Red Rover.
And what? Now they're tackling him.
Yeah.
What on earth is going on? It's kind of like Keepings Off or All Over Red Rover. We used to call that British Bulldogs one time.
Yeah, British Bulldogs, yeah. There's a scoreboard.
There's a time.
It's 21 to 34. Yeah, there's a clock.
What's it kind of like?
They're wearing numbers.
It's like a netball or a tennis court in a funny way, isn't it? With different zones.
But they're trying to like touch this person, and I don't know. Apparently, the person is saying something. I think they're saying Kabaddi, 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 and like there's an aspect of the game where you have to say something out loud.
And once you've said that, you can get.
Now the men they're holding hands in
pairs.
There's
about a dozen people on. Are they two teams, or is there sort of
There's two teams,
two clear teams, and one guy's surrounded by another team. They're dancing. Oh, and then they've tripped him over. They all hold him down.
This sport baffles me. I've sat and watched it for an hour on TV and not understood it.
Have you done any Wikipediaing?
Yeah, I've read about it and stuff. Yeah.
So do you get now what it is, or
I still don't really get it. I still don't get it.
Kabaddi.
I have read about it. Kabaddi.
Kabaddi.
Yeah. So check it out, people.
I wonder if we could.
All the Indian people who listen to this who are Kabaddi fans, like their heads are going to be going crazy right now with anger and frustration. But I find that sport baffling.
See, they would come on my podcast and explain why Kabaddi is awesome and how long. I can see it's the sort of game you can play, obviously, as like in the village. You don't need lots of equipment. You can just play it with lines on the ground by the looks of it. It looks fascinating. I'm interested. I wonder if we could get a Kabaddi league going in another country or somewhere else. Is it ever played anywhere else? And could we get a fan club or a game?
I don't think Kabaddi needs fans. Like, Kabaddi's like, it's big business.
Like, no. I mean, outside India.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll see. Wow. Anyway, there you go.
Are we on your idea? No, that was my idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's your go now, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah,
So Kabaddi wasn't your idea. It was a part of my conversation.
That was, yeah.
Oh, thank God. Me again.
Brady invented a sport. Hasn't he done that before?
Thank goodness.
This next podcast idea of mine is called Wholesome. In a world full of podcasts about crime and murder and politics and all these terrible podcasts that we have to listen to find out what's going on in the world or to entertain and titillate us with murder and crime, I'm proposing a podcast which is all about butterflies and joy. And in every episode, the hosts just do something incredibly wholesome, like bake a cake, fly a kite, pick strawberries. Every episode is just your host just doing something that's all about niceness, and everything's nice and everything's positive, and it's just like a ray of sunshine in people's lives.
That is awesome. I love this idea. That is great.
It's like an afternoon at your house.
The main reason why I love this, looking for something to watch on Netflix or a TV show, there's so much dystopia now. You know what I mean? There's so much of, crime. It's so bleak and so dark. Now, I understand I don't want to live in a fantasy world where that doesn't exist. And I like, art that engages in that stuff. But if you don't, you get so over it. There's a taste. It's like, can I just watch something nice? Is someone making a series for Netflix or something that's wholesome? And man, you're doing it.
There you go.
Not necessarily just baking bread, but you know what I mean? Like people living their lives, and it's not involving things as dark as...
I don't think it should be like, a two dudes talking podcast that's just positive and you talk about good things, though. I think that would be a bit like...
It's a bit dull, yeah.
Yeah, like that newspaper that promised it was only ever going to print good news.
Yeah.
And that went out of business and it couldn't even print that because it was a bad news story. But like...
How would you do this then? Would you this would be lots of editing and sounds and smells?
No, it'd just be like an in situ podcast, which these things exist. We should make one. I actually think we should make an episode of Wholesome while you're here. So maybe we'll go and do that in the next few days. You just take remote microphone setups, which are pretty easy, and you just go out and record.
You talk it through it. Okay, now I'm at the oven and I'm doing this, and you talk about how you're feeling. This smells great. Gosh, it's tempting to taste this and all that kind of stuff.
Tell anecdotes while you're doing it. For example, say we were to fly a kite and you and I went out now and flew a kite, which would be quite a spectacle because I don't think I can remember how to fly a kite. That would be half the fun. But then at the same time, you would tell your stories of childhood memories of flying a kite. For example, my childhood memory of flying a kite was I was given a kite when I was very young, which was actually a Tigers kite, which will impress you, for the Tigers football team. But it wasn't your beloved Richmond Tigers. It was my beloved Glenelg Tigers. Oh, yeah. So it was a big yellow kite with a Tigers face on it. I remember it vividly. I didn't know how to fly a kite. Turns out my dad didn't know that much about it either. But he took me to the park. We got it airborne, and then he let me hold the string. And I was young and dumb and scared, and I think I didn't know I was supposed to hold it or something, and I let it go. And then the wind took my kite. And it flew it away, and it flew it over like the Sturt Creek near Morford Road. It flew across to Morford Road, and it disappeared into the distance. And I imagine I started crying because my Glenelg Tigers kite was gone. And we ended up running home, and then jumping in a car and having this like search across the neighbourhood until my kite was found in like the car park of a local vet surgery 8 blocks away or something like that.
You got it back.
I got it back. But that would be like the sort of thing that's in Wholesome. Maybe that's a bit of a scary story for Wholesome, but that's
you nearly lost the kite.
Yeah, but that's what it'd be like. So it's not just all, now I'm unwinding the string.
Yeah.
You'd still tell stories and have banter and things like that. So, you got to make an entertaining podcast still.
Oh, I love this idea. I think this is great. Yeah.
I thought you would.
Yeah.
It's more for you than me because I think you're a bit of a Dudley Do-Right and you seek out wholesomeness. You're a family man, and I'm not a family man, and you're a bit of a nice guy. So
I don't think you're alien from this idea. It's your idea as well. But But there
I
is-
am capable of niceness. I gave you a drink earlier.
You did. You did. It was so awesome.
I said don't put it on the table in case you leave a stain, but
there's a bliss in these things as well. Like you gave me a Diet Coke, and I don't drink Coke very often, and so I just take a swig of it. I go, oh gosh, that's great. You know what I mean? So there's you could talk about why is it taste
tell
great?
what some other episodes. I said picking strawberries, flying, going to the zoo. That's a wholesome thing to do. What are some other wholesome activities?
Well, you mentioned the cooking thing, but I think in particular it was baking a cake, but baking bread. Or just the smell. No, going to a bakery is one of those things. Just going in and talking
Having a
about what you
picnic?
see. A picnic, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Climbing a tree.
Yes, climbing a tree, building a billy cart.
Oh yeah, making a sandcastle. There's a million episodes.
Well, there are millions of memories packed into each one of these as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there's heaps of ideas.
I'll tell you my best sandcastle building story. When I first started working at the BBC, I did a feature for TV about the furthest point you could get in all of England from the sea. Like geographically, what's the point you could stand where you were furthest from the coast that was possible?
Oh yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, so I went to the part of the coast as my start point that was closest, but still far away, like a few hundred miles away. And I took a whole bucket of sand, and then I went to this place, which is in the county of Derbyshire, on some guy's farm. And I said, "Oh, your farm over there in the paddock, and that point there is the furthest you can get from the sea of all of England." And this guy didn't know that. He was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And I said, "Do you mind if I go out there and build a sandcastle?" And I built a sandcastle on the point in England that was furthest away from the beach. He let me do it, just a little one.
He's probably built a theme park there.
Yeah, that's right.
Come to the place that's furthest away. Yeah, there's lots of things. Going for a bike ride,
Yeah.
big exploring bike ride, riding around.
I wonder if people would listen to this. And I wonder if the podcast could be true to itself. Like, could it be truly wholesome and have integrity, or would it be like tongue in cheek, wink, wink, aren't we wholesome, with like jokes or
Gambling ads halfway through.
well, yeah, but would there be like a double entendre? Like if it's aimed at adults, because you know how like children's films that appeal to adults like Shrek and things like that, they have like this adult streak through them that the adults get that the kids don't, and like they work on two levels. Would this podcast have to be operating, because it's only aimed at adults, this isn't a podcast for kids.
Yeah.
Would this podcast have to work on two levels, or could you just have the integrity to be, no, we're just going to be wholesome. For the next hour, we're just going to be two guys baking a cake and feeling the love and just being happy? Or would there have to be like not a mean streak, but like a cynical streak through it? Or would it have to do that? I don't know.
You're doing it in an ironic way. Yeah, no. No, I think it would work best to do it straight. And I think the context, if you say, look, if the context you gave it, as in there's lots of full-on stuff and life is complex and difficult and all the rest of it, do this. This is a beautiful, just for an hour, just like you said it, I think that would work, and I think you do it because I think there's something refreshing about it, and you'd listen to this podcast to be refreshed, to be reminded and refreshed and be immersed in it. You could also reflect on, why is this wholesome? Why is it interesting? And it could motivate people. Yeah, let's do this more often. I'm going to take my kids to do this, or me and my partner. Hey, let's go and have a picnic rather than just going shopping. It's not that it's ethically minded, but I think it would be appealing because there's something inside of us that wants it to be uncynical and pure and wholesome, and knows those things are refreshing when they're re-engaged with and introduced into our lives again. And
I wonder if people would listen to it to inspire them to do wholesome things like you just said, or it would become like your wholesomeness replacement. It would become your wholesome activity, like
vicarious wholesome.
yeah. Well, I'm never going to actually bake a cake. I'm too busy working the stock market, and things like that. But I'll listen to those guys bake a cake for half an hour, and that's my good deed for the day. Listening to someone else do something good.
Well, it depends. If you're going to go and rob a bank and then come home and listen to the wholesome podcast to try and redeem yourself, yes, I don't think it's quite going to wipe the blemish. But I think
it's not confession.
No. I like this idea. Yeah. I like the idea of doing it really well as well, like being well produced in an understated kind of way, with some nice music, and it's quite evocative, and here we are, and you can hear the wind, and we're flying the kite.
The birds are tweeting, and
and you're laughing. Oh, it's fallen over again, and there's that sense of, I feel, because there's exhilaration.
I like to think every episode would be like the last chapter of an Enid Blyton Magic Faraway Tree book. Because, like, obviously those books are incredibly wholesome. And, like, the kids always go for picnics and go and visit Moonface in the tree and stuff like that. But there's occasionally magical lands at the top of the tree that are a bit sinister and a bit scary. But every book ends with, oh, guess what the land at the top of the faraway tree is today? It's the land of wishes, or it's the land of birthdays. And it always ends with a really happy land where everything is just wonderful. So every episode would be like when that land comes to the top of the magic faraway tree, that's like a nice land.
Maybe you could name it or give it a theme. Today we're up the faraway tree and we're going into it's another wholesome land or something.
We're in the land of flying a kite, yeah. The land of go fly a kite.
Do you remember the land of take what you want?
Yeah.
Which is one of the early...
wasn't a good... That had a negative side to it, though, that land in the Magic Faraway Tree. That wasn't a happy land.
But they didn't get... Why? They didn't get stuck
They got
there.
in trouble. Didn't someone take something they weren't supposed to take? Or
I remember they go and get some really practical things, like Dad needs some hammer and nails or something like that.
because they're wholesome kids. They can take anything they want in the world, and the thing they take is like a hammer for Dad.
Baking soda for Mum, and, it's like really...
Yeah. Now to be an iPod.
That's right. It's like I'm taking these 10 iPads that I'm going to on-sell to the kids at school. Or no, it's really...
a key of cocaine.
Oh, goodness gracious. Land of Take What You Want is basically Vegas or something. They're such good books that they are the images, like when you just say the Magic Faraway Tree, the image comes to mind in my mind that's always been there since I read it as a kid. Like it's just so imprinted, and I can picture Moonface's house and the slide, and...
She didn't need to write that book. It's such a great title. She could have just said The Magic Faraway Tree, and I would have gone, ah. Like, it's magic and it's far away and it's a tree. It's like, it's the perfect name. Like, the book is just like superfluous after that title.
Yeah, that's right.
You could just go, the kids are going to sleep and you could just walk in and say, The Magic Faraway Tree. And they'd be like, thanks, Dad, and fall asleep.
Well, The Folk of the Faraway Tree, I think, is the first one.
Yeah, that's the Afghanistan forgotten book.
You reckon?
The Enchanted Wood is the first book. The Enchanted Wood. And I think The Magic Faraway Tree is second and Folk of the Faraway Tree is third.
Okay, I'm remembering that.
The Enchanted Wood is definitely first.
Okay. Yeah. Just the word enchanted. It speaks so much of the English countryside and a wood and, all the things.
Do you remember there was a Magic Faraway Tree chapter? I can't remember. I think it was in the Magic Faraway Tree. I can't remember. But there was an episode where Moonface and Silky and Saucepan Man go home with the kids to the parents' house, and the parents meet Moonface, and they help in the garden, and they like wouldn't the parents just have completely had their minds blown when these mythical creatures it was always supposed to be the kids went away to the tree and played with them, and it was almost like Mr. Snuffleupagus or something, and you don't actually
don't see that he's there. Yeah,
but
I don't remember why that happens, but I do remember that it does happen.
They came and helped out in the yard and do work. And
something goes, like Mr. Saucepan knocks over things or something happens that I don't quite remember.
He's clumsy and stuff.
So that's like breaking the fourth wall, isn't it? They all go into the real world. It's not the Enchanted Wood. Now it's just the Enchanted House.
They're just people.
Sitting around watching movies, ordering pizza.
They're just weird people that live in a forest that are playing with your kids. What's
that's it. Because a part of it is it's the imagination, isn't it? It's anyway.
Well, there's always maybe the subplot too that the kids are imagining it. Like they're going into the forest and playing and imagining all this stuff, and then they come home at night and what a day we had, and they're telling Mum and Dad, we went up the tree and we played with Moonface and Silky, and the parents are like, yes, darling, that sounds great. Yeah. But then when you bring Moonface home and he's out in the yard digging up carrots, it's like, oh.
Well, you're
gone now.
Pushing it a bit far, going a bit off the rails there. Do you remember The Wishing Chair and The Wishing Chair Again, which was
My sister was into them. I never got into those ones.
I read them as well. They're not as strong in my memory in terms of love. It's similar premise. They sit in the chair, wish they were going somewhere, and it'd go fly off.
She was just reformatting the same idea over and over again by that point. Enid Blyton, you cheap hack.
She's got 7 or 8 other full series of other characters.
Famous 5, my butt.
Famous 5. Gee, that's cool. Now, how did we get onto that? Oh, yeah, wholesome. Oh, yeah, Enid Blyton. Oh, yeah, that makes total sense. That's not even a segue.
How did we get to slagging off Enid Blyton? We were talking about wholesomeness, I think.
You need not have said wholesome. You should have said, this is called Enid Blyton. I went, oh, right, this is a podcast about wholesomeness.
Anyway, there you go. Wholesome. This episode has been brought to you by Audible, the world's leading provider of audiobooks. they've actually got a special deal at the moment they want to tell you about for Amazon Prime members. Amazon Prime members can get Audible for $4.95 a month for the first 3 months. That's like getting 3 months for the price of one. And after that, it's only $14.95 a month. This offer ends on July 31st, 2018. If you're interested, go to audible.com/unmade, or you can text Unmade to 500 500. By the way, non-Amazon Prime members can use that same code to receive the usual 30-day trial with your first audiobook for free. Audible, what a great time during the lovely summer here in the Northern Hemisphere. And you now are in the Northern Hemisphere.
I am.
We are in the same hemisphere. So in this lovely weather, people can just go out, sit in the sunshine, have a picnic, pop in their earbuds or earpods or AirPods or whatever they're called, listen to an audiobook. Hopefully they're wearing sunscreen at the time.
I've been wandering around the town and I've had my earbuds in and listening and enjoying it. It's wonderful. You walk around, see the sights. It's a perfect time of year for an audiobook.
What a wholesome thing it is to listen to an audiobook. And for that reason, we are going to recommend a book that I have just downloaded onto my phone. I know you already have this. And it is The Magic Faraway Tree by Enid Blyton.
Ah, what a classic. Is there any more wholesome book?
Do you know what? I was reading a review of it on Audible and the person wrote underneath, this was the book that got me into reading. And I think that's true for me too. Like, I think The Magic Faraway Tree is the book that got me interested in reading books. Like, it was the first book I read multiple times and was excited about reading on my own. And having it now as an audiobook, read by Kate Winslet, I might point out, so it's very English.
Perfect, the perfect voice.
You already have this audiobook, don't you?
I do. I've had it for ages, and we've had it as a bit of a family trip holiday car audiobook, which is a perfect idea.
Very wholesome.
Oh yeah, no. So it's popular with all members of the car, the front seat and the back seat.
You do it like on a long drive, do you? Like if we're driving like interstate or something, it's all right. We'll pop on The Magic Faraway Tree for a few hours.
Yeah. I mean, we've got several audiobooks, but this one we've done a couple of times. It's a bit of a favourite with everyone, really. And this is it for me, is those characters are in my mind, so crystal clear, Moonface and Silky, and it's like you're right there again. Like you are, I read these over and over and over again when I was a kid.
And now you can listen to them over and over and over again with Audible. Just to remind you again, Amazon Prime members, $4.95 a month for the first 3 months. That's a great deal, like 3 months for the price of one. Go to audible.com/unmade, or if you're in the US, you can text Unmade to 500 500. And our recommendation today is the very, very wholesome Magic Faraway Tree by Enid Blyton. It's read by Kate Winslet, the Hollywood star. It's a good time to read this book at the moment as well, because I've heard on the grapevine that they're making a Magic Faraway Tree movie, which I'm not entirely happy about. But if the movie's coming, you want to be up to date with the book, and this is a good way to do it. All right, you're up. What do you got? Last idea of the show before we do our Patreon idea.
This is something totally different to the things that we've talked about so far, if there is any thread running through the previous ideas. I tried, this is an idea from the plane, and I spent some time, I can remember just looking down the aisle and trying to think, what's a good name for this? And I haven't come. But I'll just go with this. Best and worst investments.
All right.
Ordinary people, but people who have good stories to tell, come on the show.
They're usually the best guests.
Yeah, they...
I'd invite someone who can't speak onto the show.
Who can't think of anything to say.
Yeah.
Welcome, bro. It's great to have you.
Thanks.
Who talk about investments, personal investments. That is, things they've bought that have been worth enormously more, but probably more than that. Not just luck, but just like I invested in this and it did really, really well. Well, this was my worst investment. Now, their investment advice, I'm sure, podcasts and TV, I mean, goodness gracious, those sorts of money managing kinds of ones. But I think a podcast idea that's just cool stories about the best and the worst investments that people have made.
As in, like, professional investments, like I bought 1,000 shares of Apple when it was like $1 a share, or is it people who like accidentally invested in something like, I bought this Star Wars figure because I was just really into Star Wars and now it's worth $10,000 because I didn't take it out of the box? Like
all of the above. There can be the big ones. It's like some of them are a bit like that Forrest Gump moment, where he invests in Apple and whatnot. But there could be the big stories, like the biggest and wisest investment of all time was when so-and-so bought this at this amount. Or the worst, when his friend sold his shares in this at this time and a month later this happened. And I think those stories are interesting anyway. But there's also small stories as well from our lives. And you'll no doubt ask me, give me an example, Tim. And I'll tell you, this is an interesting one from our perspective in that we bought a VW, I think that's an Australian, isn't it, right there? A VW Beetle on the side of the road, and it's an orange Beetle, and we really love it. It's like a 1972, I think, or 3 Superbug, and so we bought it, and we bought it for $3,000, which is a very fair price because it's pretty bung up and all the rest of it. And then after I'd had it for a few years, I go to have it insured again, and the insurance company tells me they're insuring it for $12,000 because they're worth $12,000 to replace it. I'm like, are you kidding? And they said, oh yeah, they're going up. So
had it gone up, or had you just been sold it too cheap?
No. She said, well, a matter of years had gone past because I moved insurance companies. You know what I mean? And a matter of years went past. And the lady told me, no, look, we specialize in these sorts of things, and if we're going to replace this is what it's going to cost. Now that's not, life-changing investment. But it was one of those ones. It was such a curiosity.
It definitely taps into that part of people's brain and greed that makes them watch shows like Antiques Roadshow when it's, I bought this thimble at a market for 5 cents, and then the expert tells you, that was the one that Abraham Lincoln was wearing when he knitted a jumper, and it's worth $100 million or something like.
I enjoy Antiques Roadshow, and on that, while I enjoy regular episodes, I have to admit I've gone on YouTube and looked at Antiques Roadshow, highest price, highest valuation, just to go, oh, wow. And it's intriguing because
it's a lottery ticket.
It's the payoff, is it, every time of the show. It's like interesting to hear about it, lovely to see it. What's it worth? And you're always a little bit more excited when it's worth a whole lot more.
Another twist on the investment thing could be someone saying, I sent young Dwight to have piano lessons, and it cost me $400 to teach him to play the piano, and now he's Elton John. Things you invested in that paid off in a different way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I sent little Bill Gates on that computer course. That was,
that's right.
Best $50 I ever spent.
That's right.
Says the mum living in like a mansion or something.
Yeah. But the other side of it, of course, is the worst investments. Not just as they missed out on a great investment, the day after that and so forth. But also this was an amazing investment. It was all hot. Everyone got into it, and then it absolutely tanked.
Yeah.
And there's some interest in that, particularly when it's done by experts. That one is less fun to hear that common person sharing their story. It's a bit sad. But hearing the experts and everyone believing, like the tech, the .com boom and so forth, and then something happens and it changes. It's intriguing to see why they were taken in or misguided in what happened there. And you could unpack what happened, and particularly around some of the big floats and the big companies. There's a myth that's created, a narrative that's out there, a PR is working heavily to perpetuate it. Someone mentions it in a column, and yet, people, if you look underneath it, in retrospect, there was not a whole lot of foundation as to why the company would succeed. And
my favourite thing about investments is how spouses, usually husbands from my experience, use the word investment to justify outrageous purchases. Like a watch. It's not a waste of money, it's an investment.
That's right.
No, that's not an investment. It's a Star Wars figure.
That's exactly right.
Well, I mean, that's not a bleeding edge original idea you've come up with there, and I think a lot of things like that exist. But I see what you're doing with it and how you're trying to twist it around a bit, and I think that's solid. I'd have a listen to that show if it was well done. We got time for an idea from one of our Patreon supporters?
We do.
All right, let's have a look here. You can support the Unmade podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/unmadefm. Not only do you help us make more episodes like the one you're listening to at the moment, and hopefully more that you're going to hear soon while Tim and I have some adventures around the UK, but you can also be part of the show in various ways, one of which is suggesting a podcast idea, like our good friend Paul. Paul is from... I want you to guess where Paul's from. Where's Paul from?
India.
No. Paul is from the United States, San Jose, California.
Oh, right. I've been to San Jose.
Yeah, There you go. He's a teacher. He teaches high school social studies. Like you, Dr. Harron, I have a PhD. I suspect he actually earned his PhD. Here's Paul's suggestion, which I think has quite a cool name. I think an interesting idea would be a podcast called Hall of Very Good. about people within their fields, I'm thinking sports here, but it could extend to other areas as well, who are not Hall of Fame worthy, but were part of the next tier. So sort of people who didn't like reach Hall of Fame status, but like you want to talk about them for some reason. The Hall of Very Good. I like the name.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
So I don't know whether or not, I don't know. Hall of Very Good.
Often people's favourite players aren't the greatest. I mean, often Michael Jordan is everyone's favourite player for many people, but then there's interesting reasons why another person may be their favourite player who's not quite in that league, but there's a personal connection to them somehow.
I have one of those. I'm quite a big fan of Formula One, motor racing, and my like favourite driver growing up, I think is like kind of Hall of Very Good worthy. It was a driver called Stefan Johansson.
I've never heard of him.
Yeah, well, I think he must be Swedish. And he drove for Faraway for a few seasons, and he was driving around the time that the Grand Prix was in Adelaide, so it was when my Formula One interest was triggered. And to be honest, I think he became my favourite driver because he was my best friend's favourite driver. So I just like said, okay, that's my favourite driver too. And then as I started getting into Formula One and getting all the Formula One magazines and stuff, I just fixated on him. And he was never he never won much very important. He was always just like the second driver at Ferrari and like a bit middle of the road. And he's obviously good enough to drive Formula One, so he's obviously a very good driver. But he was like my hero growing up. In fact, the other day on Instagram, someone who I used to work with, who I'm friends with, but have sort of, don't have much contact with, she posted something on Instagram saying, my biggest hero when I was growing up was the Formula One driver, Stefan Johansson. And I nearly fell out of my seat. And I was like, me too. Like I didn't know anyone else knew about him. Unfortunately, Paul didn't list an example. I would have liked to have got an example from Paul of who would be in his Hall of Very Good, but maybe he can send another email later on.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, all our Patreon supporters. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Brady.
For your ideas. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, man.
You're welcome.
From one hind dog.
One hind dog to the Heron dog.
The Herrenmeister.
Herrenmeister, yeah. Nicknames. Just a very quick message here at the end of the show about a new piece of Unmade podcast merchandise, which we're doing for a bit of fun because Tim happens to be in town. We're in the same place. So it means we can sign some things together. So we've had some postcards and posters made, and Tim and I are going to be signing them. And in the spirit of nicknames, which has been a theme of today's episode, we will also sign it to you, and we will use your nickname, or what we would prefer, if you allow us to, is we will make up a nickname for you, which we're quite looking forward to. So go to the website in the show notes if you'd like to see a postcard or a poster, fill out the form and all that sort of stuff, and we will possibly devise a nickname for you.
Oh, that's the bit I look forward to be honest.
They won't be mean-spirited nicknames, obviously. They'll be...
No.
Well, I don't know. Maybe.
No.
No, that wouldn't be wholesome.
Well, if people go to the link, they can see an example from a previous episode person who managed to have their nickname generated in our conversation, a Patreon supporter.
Yes.
And it enhances the name, if anything.
It does. Now, I think also this is a very rare opportunity to get Tim's autograph. And the reason I know it's rare is because when I asked Tim to sign a sample autograph for me for the photo, I said, Tim, can you just sign your autograph there? You like froze up. You were like, I don't know what to do. Like, you were like, what do I do?
Well,
like you didn't know what variation of writing your name to do for your, like, you obviously didn't want to use like your bank signature. So you were like, I don't know how to write my name.
I was just getting the spelling right in my head before I went wanting to make sure I did it right.
All right. So Tim will sign it, Tim Hine. Although if you make a special request on the form, maybe he will sign it Hind Dog. Are you willing to sign it Hind Dog if people ask?
If people ask, I am, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So you can have your poster or postcard. It's just a bit of fun, and it's a way of supporting the podcast and supporting the things we're getting up to over the next couple of weeks. But go and have a look. It's a bit of fun. There's a link in all the usual places. And how did you go on the plane coming up with ideas for podcasts for the next week or so?
I did pretty well. They all came on the second leg, but I wrote podcast ideas on my hand, as you can see, so I didn't forget because I knew you'd be so annoyed if I got off the plane and went...
I'm taking a picture of that. I'm taking a picture. Tim has podcast ideas written on his hand to remind him of the whole reason he's coming to England.
That's true.